Indestructible was a keyword originally introduced in 2004's Dark Steel, and it's one of the strongest abilities in the game. A permanent that's indestructible can't be destroyed by damage or effects that say destroy. That means an indestructible permanent can't be dealt with by any of the most common ways permanents are normally dealt with. That's really strong. And if you want to see some super impressive cards with Indestructible, you should check out my top 10 on the topic. However, having indestructibility alone is not enough to make a card good, and that's what we'll see in this video, where I'll be giving my picks for the 10 worst indestructible cards ever printed. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. In order to make it on one of my worst lists, the following things have to be true. It has to be bad in 60 card constructed, 40 card limited, and commander. It also has to have always been bad. If a card is bad today but was good in its original context, it won't be included here. In short, a card has to be bad everywhere and for all of its history, or it can't be on the list. Alright, let's dive in with my picks for the 10 worst cards with Indestructible. At number 10, I've got Dark Steel Relic. It's a 0 mana artifact, and it's indestructible, and that's it. I did a top 10 worst list on 0 mana cards a couple weeks back, and many people in the comments thought this should have made it. And I can see their point. The floor on this card is awful, since it doesn't do anything at all. But the Relic also has the most upside of any card on this list. Being a 0 mana artifact itself matters, since there are lots of artifact payoffs, and the sooner you can get an artifact in play early, the better. It can get especially interesting if you're interested in animating artifacts. Don't get me wrong, the Relic is bad, and people are playing it way too much in Commander, but this 0 mana artifact is better than everything else on the list, and everything on the 0 mana list too, since there are a decent number of situations where playing this doesn't feel completely terrible. At number 9, it's Necromancer's Familiar. Modern Horizons 2 is famous for being super powerful, but this card didn't get the memo. It's 3 generic and a black for a 3/1 flyer, a very rough starting point, and while the text box is all upside, there just isn't enough. If you have no cards in hand, it gets lifelink, and if you pay 1 black and discard a card, you can make the Familiar indestructible until end of turn and tap it. This type of temporary indestructibility is interesting because they introduced it to replace the regenerate mechanic. That's why the creature taps. Anyway, the Familiar can be a pesky attacker to some extent, but 1 toughness means that it dies to literally everything, and while having the ability to become indestructible helps soften that blow, the fact you have to give up a card and have mana available to give it that indestructibility is a pretty big ask on a creature you already paid 4 mana for. And you end up going down a card either way, even if your Familiar survives, so you're not getting a huge advantage. Sure, eventually you'll be hellbent because you made it indestructible so many times, but you're probably losing the game if that's your plan. This has a bad stat line, a costly way to become indestructible, and an additional effect that is only available when you're out of cards. Yeah, no thanks. At number 8, it's Rakish Scoundrel, the newest card on the list. It came out in Murders at Karlov Manor. For 2 generic, a black, and a green, it's a 3/3 with Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield or is turned face up, a creature gains indestructible until end of turn. It also has Disguise, which means you can pay 3 generic to play it face down as a 2/2 with Ward 2, and you can turn it face up for 4 generic and 2 black-green hybrid mana. So, yeah, the Scoundrel has a very dense text box, but that doesn't make it anything close to a good card. A 4 mana 3/3 with Death Touch is not a good starting point. In formats like Limited, Death Touch can definitely be good, but you need it on a cheap creature in most situations, since the great thing about it is that a Death Touch creature can trade for anything. The more expensive your creature gets, the less that matters. And sure, its enter the battlefield, turn face up trigger can have its moments. For example, you can turn it face up after having it block something and give the Scoundrel indestructibility, but you have to have 6 mana to do that, and you have to really hope your opponent can't interact in any way, or you're going to get very blown out. If you play it face up, the enter the battlefield ability can maybe do something, but your creature generally needs to already be good for indestructibility to matter, and if you're behind, it's completely useless. No one plays a creature this inefficient in Commander or 60 card formats, and it wasn't good in Limited either. Since this is from a newer set, we have 17 lands data, which shows us that across several 100,000 drafts on Magic Arena, this has a win rate of 50.7%. Given that the average 17 lands user has a 55% win rate in that format, that makes this pretty much an unplayable card. At number 7, it's Accursed Horde. For 3 generic and a black, it's a 3/3, and you can pay 1 generic and a black to give an attacking zombie indestructible until end of turn. This card has some real similarities to the Scoundrel. Both are underwhelming 4 mana 3/3s, and both can grant indestructibility to themselves or other creatures. While the Horde can offer indestructibility more efficiently, and can do it more than once, the restrictions placed on it are a really big deal. Only being able to give attacking zombies indestructibility really makes it difficult for this card to do anything meaningful in Amonkhet Limited, and you also couldn't afford to sink mana into that effect all that often in the first place. Zombies are one of the most popular themes in Commander, and Accursed Horde still only sees play in around 700 decks, and the number should probably be even lower. At number 6, it's Seraph of the Suns. For 5 generic and 2 white, it's a 4/4 flyer with Indestructible. I've mentioned a few times that you can't just slap Indestructible on something and automatically have it be good. It generally needs to be a nice creature already, or at least be kind of efficient. The Seraph doesn't even get close. If you're dropping 7 mana on a 4/4 flyer, even an Indestructible one, you're going to be in a world of hurt, since your opponent is going to be able to do something far more powerful with that kind of mana. And it's not like indestructible creatures are completely immune to removal anyway. The way the Seraph is costed, you'd think that was the case. But remember, an indestructible creature can die to effects that lower toughness, can be exiled, can be shuffled into your opponent's deck, can be sacrificed, and can be enchanted. So your opponent has a pretty good chance at removing this 7 mana card for a couple of mana, and a creature like this isn't worth the risk in any format. At number 5, it's Darksteel Gargoyle. For 7 mana, it's a 3/3 artifact creature with flying and indestructible. So it's a lot like Seraph of the Suns. It's easier to cast, but even smaller than the Seraph, so I decided to put it even higher on the list. All the things that apply to the Seraph apply here too, although the fact it's also an artifact means it will be even easier to remove. At number 4, it's Grappling Sundew. For 1 generic and a green, it's a 0/4 with Defender and Reach, and you can pay 4 generic and a green to make it indestructible until end of turn. It's pretty hard for a defender that is incapable of doing anything other than blocking to be good, and that's what we have here. Sure, it can even block flyers, but it's never going to kill anything, and your opponent won't ever have a problem attacking into it since there's no real risk. Even when it becomes indestructible for way too much mana, all it means is that you effectively fogged 1 creature, and spending that much mana on that effect is awful. At number 3, it's Drudge Sentinel. Meant to be a Drudge Skeletons for a new generation, Drudge Sentinel is way worse. For 2 generic and a black, it's a 2/1, and you can pay 3 generic and tap it to give it indestructible until end of turn. A 3 mana 2/1 is a horrible rate, and the 1 toughness means you better have those 3 generic mana available all the time, because it's probably going to die to a token blocking it, or simply go into combat with something way bigger. 3 mana is just way too much for indestructibility. Drudge Skeleton could regenerate for 1 black after all. It will quickly enter Grappling Sundew territory too, where all it can do is block and blanket attack, and that's not worth 3 mana a turn. This is another recent card that we have 17 lands data for, and the data is not kind to the Sentinel. It has a 48.2% win rate in a format where the average 17 lands user had a 55.1% win rate. At number 2, it's Darksteel Brute. For 2 generic mana, it's an indestructible artifact, and you can pay 3 generic mana to have it become a 2/2 until end of turn. This is interesting to compare to the much more heavily played Darksteel Relic. While it has more upside in a vacuum, since it's also an indestructible artifact, but it can become a creature all on its own, it's still a worst card. It's because it's a really small creature and one that costs way too much mana to get going. The Brute is mostly just a 2 mana version of the Relic, and that's way worse in terms of setting up artifact synergies. And at number 1, it's Consecrate Land. As an alpha card, Consecrate Land didn't originally have the word indestructible in its text box, since the keyword didn't get introduced until 11 years later. However, it always had an effect very similar to indestructibility, so the keyword is there in its oracle text. For 1 white mana, it's an enchantment aura with Enchant Land, and the enchanted land is indestructible and can't be enchanted by other auras. Yeah, spending a mana and a card on making a single land indestructible and not getting anything else out of it is never worth doing, even against an opponent packing lots of land destruction. After all, you're going to have other lands that they can destroy, and those are going to cause you lots of problems too. Consecrate Land is the kind of card that will make you feel like you took a mulligan anytime you find it in your opening hand, because it isn't even useful against the one opponent it was designed to be used against. So, those are my picks for the 10 worst indestructible cards in Magic. If you want to own any of these cards, because maybe you want to prove me wrong, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in this video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at the worst cards in the game, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.